This week I had the pleasure to attend the M Squared conference for the Yomim, for Yom HaZikaron, Yom HaAtzmaut, on how to create a different experience given the events that have taken place, in the world since October 7th. And towards the end of the day, like after lunch, before the afternoon sessions, the director of M Squared got up and he reminded us that he knows that typically the afternoon sessions of a conference, people lose their steam, and he wanted to frame for us and remind us that we don't typically get this type of time to just think creatively, and this time to work with educators and just think about what is the ideal program that we want to create, and that we really won't have this time again. And it really resonated with me. It really hit me because it's so true. I find that I am constantly running from one thing to the next, usually not giving myself the time to just think, to just reflect, or not even being able to give myself that time. When I'm driving, to or from school, I'm usually listening to either Shir and podcast or my own podcast to edit, and obviously all the phone calls that I need to make. And I remember, like last year, I loved taking times where I just needed to just quiet everything and just think. Like I wouldn't put on anything and literally just drive for an hour straight with no noise, just to think to myself. But honestly, it rarely happens. This week's maftir is different. It's a regular maftir. It's the regular maftir for Pekudei. And it's interesting. That's not, last week was Shkalim, next week is Zachor. And there's a special mnemonic in the Gemara Megillah to help us remember the way it falls out. And there usually is some off weeks. Like this is an off week from one of the special maftirs. And it's an interesting thing to think about. Like why? Why do we have that? Perhaps I think we can learn maybe from next week's Parsha, where it tells us that Hashem spoke to Moshe and there were breaks. And Rashi asks this question, like, why? Why were there breaks? And Rashi explains the reason was to give Moshe a break to analyze and reflect on the experience of talking to Hashem, what he learned, and just give him the break that he needs. Perhaps that's the same thing with these Parshahs. The whole purpose of these maftirs, of these special Parshahs, is to gear us up for Purim and Pesach, and maybe we need the breaks in order to give us the time to think about what messages do we want to take from each of these Parshahs. Like, so this week's a break. So it's time to take a break and think about, okay, what did I learn from Parsha Shkalim? What message do I want to take? Shkalim is about Aftos or different things we could take about it. So what message do I take from that to next week, to Zachor? And then right after that to start preparing for Pesach. I was thinking this is so apropos for parents as well. As parents, we are running from one thing to the next, literally constantly. The second, if we're working, the second we get home from work, we are literally, or while we're driving home from work, we're thinking about all the different things that we need to do. Whether we have children's lunches to make, dentist appointments to book, and we have to get their snacks ready, and we have to get their outfits ready for the next day, and we have to help them with their homework, and all these different things. And we don't usually necessarily take the time to just reflect on the lives that we're living, on our time with our children, to think about this time that we have with our children that we won't have with them in this stage and age again. And people always say to me, like, "Oh, your children are so young, they grow up just like that." And it's so true. I mean, I'm seeing it already that like as my children are getting older, I'm like, oh my gosh, like they're growing up so fast. This is crazy, and they're still young. I can't even imagine if they were even older. And to help us appreciate, we need these breaks. Right. And then so I think once we go through this process ourselves, which is important for ourselves, which is something meaningful and powerful that a husband and wife can do together, then we can model it for our children to help them to take some time to reflect, to give them an understanding and appreciation of the time that we're living, the good things that are happening in our lives, the messages that we want, that they want to take, that we want them to take for example, and how do we do this? When do we do this? Practically speaking, dinner time or bedtime or on a Shabbos meal, and help them to stop and to reflect. Ask them, what was something that stuck out about your day? What was something that stuck out about your week? What's something that you're thankful to Hashem about? And it's so important to give our children this like tool, this skill to be able to stop and slow things down. It's so important, especially because we're living in such a fast-paced world. With technology, there are literally no breaks. If you're dealing with teenagers already, if you're parenting teenagers, the amount that they literally don't have a break because they're constantly with their Instagram or their TikTok or their social media, the Snapchat, all these different things, there's literally no break. They're constantly texting. Their minds just do not have a break. I remember when I was teaching last year in high school, and I had my students, we got in a round circle and we were talking, and I asked them, what's their favorite mitzvah? And so many students said, Shabbos. Shabbos. Why? Because they like that break. They need that break. It's otherwise so intense and so busy during the week. And honestly, people don't know how to take breaks with themselves. I remember I was once listening to a speech by the famous Rabbi Avram J. Twersky, who's a famous speaker, author, and psychiatrist. And he was saying that people are so uncomfortable with themselves. He said, people, if they go into a pool or a hot tub by themselves, most people are uncomfortable. They can be in there for like 10 seconds and they feel like, oh my gosh, like when am I getting out already? This is crazy. Like, because people they're uncomfortable with themselves. And by doing this process, we can get more comfortable with ourselves. And one of our jobs as parents is to help our children have this tool, have this skill to be comfortable with themselves, which will be so good for their emotional and psychological well-being, giving them the skill that they need to slow life down, to think to themselves, to reflect. And if we do this, it could be such a powerful parenting tool. Just like Moshe needed it, we need it, and our children need it too. Have an amazing Shabbos.